Welcome everyone in this new video tutorial about the multiplayer combat editor. In this video we're going to talk about trigger modifiers. So it's a subject you might have been overviewed already if you watched the video about passive skills, but we are going to cover it in details in this video. So what are trigger modifiers? These are basically an advanced class of modifiers which has built-in functions to listen and react to game events. So we're going to open up our modifier folder, right-click, create a new blueprint class, and type in trigger modifier, and we want to create a new one, and call that BP, my trigger modifier. And we are going to just take a moment to talk about what is this and how you can use this and how it is already used in MCE. So this is just an object. So this is pretty cheap to spawn. So it basically costs nothing to spawn. So lots of MCE built-in features are using this to store information and spawn them dynamically to basically listen to game events and react. So you have several examples using this, and the main thing that the main feature using the trigger modifiers in MCE are passive skills. So that's why you might have been covering this. You might have watched the video already, because passive skills were an important topic. Because passive skills are usually triggering things, might be triggering things based on what happens in the game. So I took League of Legends as an example when I created that feature, when I designed that feature. So for instance, if you take the Katarina passive ability, which refreshes all of her cooldowns when she gets a kill, I created that so you can react to the game event on kill and check and do stuff based on this. So for instance, refreshing the cooldowns. But I also thought of things such as the old Vladimir passive ability, which was pretty simple and was reading for each bonus else you have, you get bonus ability power and vice versa. So you can do this as well. So you react to the game event when a stat gets modified, and you have a lot. But also other passive abilities like I don't know, the previous Irelia passive, which was reading for each enemy champions around you, you get more tenacity. So you can do that as well with the trigger modifier. So this is built in the passive logic, the passive skill logic. So I was using this, but since listening to these events might be interesting in for other things as well, I made sure to separate the passive skill and the trigger modifier logic, so we can use that object for other things. And these other things are these other features are, for instance, the status feature. So for instance, you can spawn a status which, if we open up our example status we created, if you follow the status video, if you haven't, make sure you do. So if we open up our status, in here we are actually spawning a status called My Silence, which is preventing the target of that status from casting ability. It's preventing it from casting ability. But in here you can see that the trigger modifier we created has appeared, and you can select that. So this status can actually apply the trigger modifier we created. And I built the status feature in a way that it can take advantages of the logic you build in your trigger modifier. So you can build statuses that react to game events as well. So for instance, you add a trigger modifier status that says when you get damaged, as long as you have the status, when you get damaged, you return the damage dealt. For instance, I don't know, build a thorn aura or stuff like this. So the possibilities are kind of limitless on that side. Not to mention the fact that you can use the trigger modifier logic for your own features, regardless of MCE, regardless of how I use them for built-in features. So you could be spawning this, attach this, make. When you are spawning this, you need to specify what is the target of this. So for instance, if we head to our third-person character, if we hit the P key, is the P key used? I'm not sure anymore. It doesn't seem to be used, so we're just going to bring up the P key. And if we say add trigger modifier, so this is how you can use the feature on your own. And I talked about how MCE was using the trigger modifier feature. It will oftentimes I already built function that makes you able to create them. So you oftentimes, when you use MCE built-in feature, you usually won't be calling roughly add trigger modifier. But if you want to do that, if you want to use that feature on your own, you are usually going to call that node. So for instance, when you hit P, it's going to add a trigger modifier. Of course, this is not working in multiplayer right away. This is not being replicated. So if you want that to be replicated, you need to say that you want to add trigger modifier like this. You want to create another event. Server add trigger modifier. You want that event to be a run on server event. Reliable. This is going to call add trigger modifier like this. And then P is going to call server add trigger modifier. We're going to break that link. Add trigger modifier is going to call our macro. The target of the trigger modifier is going to be us. And we are going to create the trigger modifier we just created. We are actually going to drag and drop that purple node here. It's going to create the proper parameter for us, so we can drag it here once again, and it's going to create it automatically when we call that event. And it's going to ask for what type of trigger modifier we want. We want to add that. So when we hit P, it's going to add. Oh no, we need to add. We actually want the modifier to be spawned everywhere, and right now we are only spawning that on the server. So we want to call multicast add trigger modifier like this. And it's going to be a multicast reliable, which is going to call add trigger modifier like that. And server trigger modifier is going to call multicast add trigger modifier like this. So when I hit P, I'm asking the server, can you tell everyone to spawn a trigger modifier? The server says, yes, of course, I'm going to do it. It's doing it. It means triggering the function called add trigger modifier. That function is the event we created there. And that event is basically creating the trigger modifier we are passing as parameter all the way along. So we can use this for other trigger modifiers if we want. If we hit compile, hit save, we have a small logic that spawns our trigger modifier. So we can actually open our trigger modifier like this. And we are going to right click. type in event begin play, type in print string, and just make sure our trigger modifier is properly spawning. So if I hit P, it's not printing, and that's because I forgot to add a world context object there. We are going to drag that up and say get mod target, which is the actor, the object being modified by that trigger modifier. So if we hit play, hit P, it's not triggering. And we are going to head back to our third-person character, add a print string there, just to make sure our P key is being properly triggered. So the P key is triggered, but the rest is not being triggered. And that might come from the fact that I'm not supposed to be calling event begin play. That's strange. I'm going to open up a trigger modifier I created in the examples. Modifier, prefab, skill, talent, statuses. All right, I created them in skills, so I didn't need to. But that's actually quite strange that it's not triggering. It should be triggering. I'm calling construct on them. And what does construct do on trigger on trigger modifier? Construct does nothing. So I think we just need to be calling construct, but that's strange. That might be something I need to work on. That wasn't. Yep. That wasn't. So it's triggering on all machines. But that wasn't quite logical, considering you have to call begin play when you set up regular modifiers, but whatever. So we need to be calling this, and then we can use all the power of the trigger modifiers. So if we already watched the passive skills, it might be a bit redundant here, but since it's quite straightforward, we're going to be quick. How can you use the functions here? Either you are coding the logic you want here, and you can be calling something like assign. You drag a wire out of the pin, out of the constrict node, and you type in assign, and then you get a bunch of things you can call. These are all events that are going to be called automatically when the target of that trigger modifiers witnesses the event you want to be reacting to. So for instance, you want to react to a kill being made by the target of that trigger modifier. You are going to click the assign dispatch on kill like this, and it's going to give you an event that is going to fire automatically when the target of that trigger modifier kill something. If the target of your modifier has a combat manager, obviously. But you can, and there are a lot of events you can react to on ill applied receive, but it's so not only combat triggers, also action triggers. So for instance, you can listen to your targets, to the target of that trigger when the target of that trigger reloads or run or sprints or whatever, or uses skills. if it has an action manager, obviously. You can also react to stat updates. If you click the assign dispatch stat updates, like this, whenever you are assigning a custom event, it's oftentimes giving you parameters. The parameters you can often drag a wire out of and type in break to read the information you want and you need to react to. So for instance, when you kill something, how much damage you dealt to, what did you killed, the hit result, and stuff like that. When a stat gets updated, you can read what stat gets updated, what is the current stat value and stuff like that. And you also have a built-in event called stat threshold. Just type in threshold like that. As you might have seen in the passive skill function. This is basically a built-in logic that makes you able to do stuff here depending on what stat gets modified and how much of that stats is remaining in percent. So for instance, if you add this node here and specify else in threshold 0 to 100, it's going to return true whenever your else gets modified in between 0 and 100%, and it's going to return false if it's not within this threshold. But of course, it's always going to be within that threshold here. So if you specify 0 to 50, it's going to trigger true whenever it's in between 0 and 50%, obviously. And you have others dispatchers that behave quite the same, which you can react to. And you also have advanced features which are going to be covered in other videos. We're just going to construct and assign to damage being received. We are going to add a print to string, which is going to be handled by the target of that object. And we are going to print the name of the actor which dealt damage to us. So we are going to break that like this. And we are going to print the name of the source of the damage for 5 seconds. Hit compile, hit save. We're going to hit play, hit P. So the server has the trigger modifier, and we are going to switch team and deal damage to it. And it's not going to return anything. So we are going to get rid of the string and we are just going to print hello for now. Hit P. And we are going to damage him. And it's not even printing, and I'm not sure why. It should be printing. Oh, of course. Well, no, I'm hitting P with that character, and then when the character, so I'm adding that modifier to a character, so it should be printing when that character gets damaged. Yep, that's the logic. So why doesn't it work? Interesting. Oh, I think I know why. I just need to be calling begin play, I think. Like this. So if I hit P, hit plus to switch team, and then if I get damaged, I think it means the dispatcher of that trigger modifier are not up. So I think I need to go check how passive effects are being handled. So basically I'm just creating them like we are, except I'm storing them, but whatever. I'm adding the trigger modifier, so it's calling construct. Then construct in trigger modifier construct is not doing anything by default. Alright, so that comment is telling me what I should be doing. I should be calling that function unbinding initialized, so not on event begin play. Unbindings initialized, so that's not clear. That will be better and when MCE its full release. So we are going to specify that the bindings are being initialized. We are going to hit P and plus, then head back to that guy and hit the first guy. And it's telling me that I'm dealing. Oh, we add lags. So I'm going to just check if we have something in our output log. So maybe this comes from our lag comes from the warnings there, which come from the root motion, the replicated root motion. But in any case, we had our print, which was saying which character was dealing damage. So maybe you want to deal damage to the character dealing damage to you. And in that case, you can say, for instance, find combat manager of the actor which dealt damage to me. And if the actor which dealt damage to me actually has a combat manager, we can deal it damage like this. But in order to deal damage to it, I think we need a combat manager, or else maybe we don't. Well, let's see if that works. We are going to say that we want to return the damage we deal. So for instance, whenever we take damage, we are going to grab the actor that dealt damage to us, and we are going to deal its damage based on the amount of damage we took. And for now, we are just going to say we return 100% of the amount of damage taken, but you could say that you want to deal, for instance, I don't know, 50% of the damage you take as damage back to the attacker. Like this. I think we can just specify it like that and try. If we hit P, hit plus, get back there. Yep, we take 100 of the damage we deal back when we deal damage to him. So maybe we just want to return 30% of the damage we deal. So hit P, hit plus. So we are not dealing damage. What's happening there? Okay. So apparently the server is telling us we are not dealing damage on the server. And the client says we are dealing damage, but since the server is the master, and sometimes our else regen is kicking in as well, but that's a little bit odd. So maybe we don't deal enough damage. Oh, I know what's going on. We are only taking 1 damage we are going to test back. So apparently, I'm not sure. So I think that's because we are dealing with very low values. I think the fact that sometimes the health of our clients was not being decreased when he was hitting the server, like in this case, maybe because I just didn't apply the status in that case. Yep, I just didn't apply it. So as you could see on the server, the client was oriented towards that direction, and on the client I was properly oriented towards the guy. But since the server is the master, and on that machine the client was not looking at my character, it was looking a bit like this. The server said no damage were dealt. So you have to make sure the damage detection is properly, how you detect your damage is not depending on something which is not accurate. So for instance, in my case, it's based on the current actor rotation, and maybe it should be set on the static actor rotation or the actor rotation at the beginning of the skill or stuff like this, to make sure if I cast it on the client, it's deal damage. So why is it never dealing damage there? I felt like okay, so they killed each other. So what's the error there? Mm-hmm. So we received an error because we are killing our characters, because our character got killed from the trigger modifier we created. And we did not specify any source or owner of damage. And we are propulsing our ragdoll from the source of damage, from the orientation of the source of damage. So our ragdoll is using that information, which we are not providing here. So it returned an error. And you could be fixing this by just saying that if there is no source, you do nothing in your death event of your character, or you could just solve this by saying that whoever you dealt damage to is also whoever dealt damage to you is also responsible for you taking back damage to. So the thorn effect will propel people away from him when killing them, for instance. So that's one way you can use trigger modifier on your own, but most of the time, when you use trigger modifier in MCE built-in features like statuses, I'm going to open up example status and I'm going to. So this is returning a modifier, and we want to actually create a trigger modifier there. So in your case, if you want to create a trigger modifier in a status, you will have to say you will actually have to create it. You will have to create it this way and then cast it into either your generic type of trigger modifier, either the specific modifier you are looking for, you create it there, then store that into a variable, and then get that variable and do whatever you were doing there. Every logic here, you can build it here by just dragging a wire out of there and typing a sign. And we were reacting to the game events on damage received, for instance. So you can build that logic in here and do exactly what you were doing. And you can also, you will also have to call on binding initialized like this. So this is how you can use trigger modifier in statuses. And if you want to use trigger modifier in passive skills, you can watch the related video in the skills playlist. And some of trigger modifier have some other features which are going to be the subject of other videos. So it's going to wrap up this one. Hope you enjoyed it and hope to see you in the next ones. Bye bye.